President. Madam President, I think there is a widespread perception among the people of our country that things are getting worse, not better. Polls seem to indicate that people feel that life for the middle class in the last 10 years is not as good as it used to be. By very strong numbers, the people of our country believe that the economy is getting worse, not better. We are the greatest country in the history of the world, but there is something wrong when, if current economic trends continue, the young people in our country will have a lower standard of living than their parents. We are moving in many respects in exactly the wrong direction, and it is our job as members of the United States Senate to turn that around and to begin making government work for all people rather than just the wealthy and the powerful who have so much power over what goes on in this institution. Madam President, I rise today in strong support of the Employee Free Choice Act, and I commend Senator Kennedy for his leadership on this issue. Madam President, year after year after year, millions of American workers have been working longer hours for lower wages. In my state of Vermont, it is not uncommon for people to work 2 jobs and on occasion work 3 jobs in order to cobble together an income, in order to cobble together some health insurance. Consider the facts. Madam President, since 2001, median household income has fallen by nearly $1,300. Wages and salaries now make up their lowest share of the economy in nearly 6 decades. The number of Americans who lack health insurance has grown by 6.8 million since 2001 to over 46 million Americans without any health insurance today. The number of Fortune 1000 companies that have frozen or terminated their pension plans has more than tripled since 2001. Indeed, the middle class itself has shrunk. Over 5 million more Americans have slipped into poverty since the year 2000. So what we are seeing is the average American working longer hours for lower wages. There are millions of Americans who work today who scarcely have any vacation time whatsoever. People are losing their health insurance, they are losing their pensions, and they're sitting around looking at the reality that if we don't turn this around, their kids will be even worse off than they were, all at the same time as technology is exploding and worker productivity is increasing. But meanwhile, Madam President, while the middle class shrinks and poverty increases, corporate profits today make up their largest share of the economy since the 1960s. While the middle class is shrinking, millionaires and billionaires in this country have never had it so good since the late 1920s. Madam President, today the wealthiest 1% of Americans own more wealth than the bottom 90%. And the CEOs of our largest corporations now earn 400 times as much as the average worker. This, Madam President, is not just an economic issue. This is a moral issue. Is this what America is supposed to be about? Wealthiest 1% owning more wealth than the bottom 90%, and the gap between the rich and the poor growing wider every day as the middle class continues to shrink. Madam President, I don't believe that that is what America is supposed to be. At the same time that workers are seeing a decline in real wages, are being forced to pay more for their health insurance, are seeing their pensions slashed, the CEOs of large corporations make out like bandits. And just one simple example. Several years ago, as you'll recall, the former CEO of ExxonMobil, Lee Raymond, received a $400 million retirement package while we are paying over $3 for a gallon of gas. And ExxonMobil last year enjoyed the highest profits of any corporation in the history of the world. But it's not just CEOs like Mr. Raymond. At a time when big banks are ripping off American consumers by charging outrageous interest rates and sky-high fees, Richard Fairbank, the CEO of Capital One Financial, received over $300 million in total compensation over the past 5 years. While consumers have been getting ripped off at the gas pump, Ray Irani, the CEO of Occidental Petroleum, raked in over $500 million in total compensation over the past 5 years. And on it goes. CEOs making out like bandits, workers paying $3 for a gallon of gas, losing their health insurance, losing their pensions, losing their homes. The middle class is shrinking, poverty is increasing, and millionaires and billionaires have never had it so good. And, Madam President, it is our job to turn that around. There are a lot of reasons for the growing inequality in our economy, and economists may differ, but there is clearly agreement on some of the basic reasons why the gap between the rich and the poor is growing wider and the middle class is shrinking. The failure, up until very recently, to raise the minimum wage is an obvious example. Millions and millions and millions of workers today, before the new minimum wage goes into effect, are making $5.15 an hour. Yes, the United States Congress has provided hundreds of billions of dollars in tax breaks for the wealthiest 1%, but we couldn't raise the minimum wage until a few weeks ago. And that is certainly one of the reasons that poverty in America is increasing. Another reason is that unfettered free trade, which forces American workers to compete against desperate workers in China, Mexico, and Vietnam, is also responsible for an increase in poverty and lowered standard of living for millions of American workers. No, American workers should not be forced to compete against desperate workers in China who are making 30 cents an hour. That is not a level playing field. That is wrong, and that is another reason why the middle class in this country is in decline. But, Madam President, perhaps the most significant reason for the decline in the middle class is that the rights of workers to join together and to bargain for better wages, better benefits, and better working conditions have been severely undermined over the years. Today, Madam President, if an employee is engaged in a union organizing campaign, that employee has a 1 in 5 chance of getting fired. Today, half of all employers threaten to close or relocate their business if workers choose to form a union. Today, when workers become interested in forming unions, 92% of private sector employers force employees to attend closed-door meetings to hear anti-union propaganda. 80% require supervisors to attend training sessions on attacking unions. 78% require that supervisors deliver anti-union messages to workers they oversee, and 75% hire outside consultants to run anti-union campaigns. Madam President, in 2005 alone, over 30,000 workers were discriminated against, losing wages or even their jobs for exercising their constitutional rights of freedom of association, a right guaranteed under the Constitution of the United States. Further, Human Rights Watch has said, and I quote, "Freedom of association is a right under severe, often buckling pressure when workers in the United States try to exercise it," end of quote. The right to come together to form a union is a constitutional right. It is under severe, unprecedented attack today. And, Madam President, even when workers who are faced with all of these enormous obstacles, even when these workers win union elections, more than 1/3 of the victories do not result in a first contract for workers. Madam President, today, corporate executives are routinely negotiating obscenely high compensation packages for themselves, but then they deny their own employees their ability to come together to create better wages and working conditions and better lives for themselves. That is wrong, and this Senate has got to stand up for those workers. It is time to turn this around. It is time to stand up for the working people of this country, and that is what the Employee Free Choice Act is all about. The House of Representatives did the right thing when it passed the Employee Free Choice Act by a vote of 241 to $185 earlier this year. Now it is time for the Senate to act. Madam President, this legislation is very simple. The Employee Free Choice Act would simply allow workers to join unions when a majority sign valid authorization cards stating that they want the union as their bargaining representative. Madam President, as Senator Kennedy has correctly pointed out, card check recognition was the law of the land in the United States from 1941 to 1966. In other words, all this legislation does is give workers the same rights they had 41 years ago. More than half of the United States workforce, nearly 60 million workers, say that they would join a union right now if they had the opportunity. Yet only 12% of the workforce has a union. This is much different than in other countries around the world, other industrialized countries. In Canada, where card check is the law of the land, twice as many workers belong to unions than in the United States. And in Britain, where card check recognition is the law of the land, 60% of workers belong to unions. What has strong union participation meant for workers in other countries? And this is an important point to be made, because it is terribly important that we in the Senate see what's going on in the rest of the industrialized world, see and note the benefits that workers around the world are receiving that our workers are not. Just a few examples. In Finland, where 2/3 of workers belong to unions, guess what? Unlike college graduates in the United States who are graduating here $20,000 in debt, Finland provides a free college education, including law and medical schools, to all qualified citizens. Pretty good. They encourage young people to go to college and graduate school tuition free. While the cost of child care in the United States is skyrocketing, millions of American families can't afford quality child care. In Finland, daycare is free to all citizens. Unlike the United States, where the 2-week vacation is becoming a thing of the past, in Finland, workers are guaranteed 30 days of paid vacation and 60 days of paid sick leave. In Norway, where the union participation rate is about 60%, women receive 42 weeks of maternal leave at full pay, while United States workers here only receive 12 weeks of unpaid maternal leave. And in Belgium, France, and Sweden, over 90% of workers belong to unions. Workers in those countries all have much stronger pensions, health care, child care, and vacation benefits than American workers. Madam President, in addition to the card check provision, the Employee Free Choice Act would also stiffen penalties against employers that illegally fire or discriminate against workers for their union activity during an organizing or first contract drive. And perhaps most importantly, this legislation would make it easier for workers who win union elections to negotiate a first contract. We will end the situation when workers decide to form a union, they go to negotiations, and the employer simply refuses to negotiate. Madam President, in order to strengthen America's middle class, we have got to restore workers' rights to bargain for better wages, benefits, and working conditions. After all, union workers in this country earn 30% more on average than non-union workers who are performing the same jobs. 80% of union workers have employer-provided health insurance. Only 49% of non-union workers do. 68% of union workers have a guaranteed pension through a defined benefit plan. Only 14% of non-union workers do. 62% of union workers have short-term disability benefits. Only 35% of non-union workers do. And union workers have, on average, 15 days of paid vacation, while non-union workers, on average, have fewer than 11 days of paid vacation. Again, I thank Senator Kennedy for his leadership on this issue. We have got to do everything that we can, from a moral perspective, to reverse the decline of the middle class, to lower our poverty rates, to improve the standard of living of American workers, and passing the Employee Free Choice Act is an important step in that direction. Thank you very much, Madam President.